As a retired teacher, all I ever wished for was a peaceful life surrounded by my children and grandchildren. But my daughter-in-law, Maria, never seemed to want that. She always knew how to turn our home into a battlefield, making the atmosphere as tense as a storm and leaving her little son crying his heart out. Yet, everyone kept praising her. A wonderful mother, a woman who perfectly balances her career and family life, a queen of the courtroom, a young and successful lawyer with countless titles that inflated her pride even more. But no one knew the truth. The higher Maria climbed in her career, the more she tormented her own family, turning our lives into a living hell. As a mother and a grandmother, I couldn't stand by and let her destroy everything we had built. So what did I do to protect my family? Stay with me in today's video to find out. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. I believe many of you will find a piece of your own story in mine. After my husband's funeral, the house felt too quiet, too hollow. Every room still carried his scent and his laughter, and I thought maybe staying would help me keep him close. But Nick, my only son, wouldn't hear of it. "Mom, come live with us. You'll have family around. It'll help you heal," he said, his voice gentle, almost pleading. I didn't want to be a burden, but he looked so certain, so hopeful, that I agreed. I packed 2 suitcases, a small box of photo albums, our wedding picture, and the ceramic vase my husband loved. As I closed the door of our old 2-bedroom house, I whispered goodbye to a life that would never return. Maria greeted me at their doorstep with a smile too polished to be sincere. She touched my arm lightly, saying how happy she was to have me there. "We'll take good care of her," she cooed to Nick as if I were an elderly neighbor, not his mother. I smiled back, pretending not to notice the chill beneath her tone. Inside, the house gleamed, every corner perfect, every detail modern and expensive. But as I carried my things to the guest room, her eyes followed me like a silent scanner. There was no warmth in that gaze, only calculation. That first night, I unpacked quietly while Nick worked late and Maria scrolled through her phone in the living room. I placed the wedding photo on the bedside table, right beside the vase. Somehow, it felt like reclaiming a tiny corner of my old life. Yet, when Maria passed by my open door, her eyes flicked to the photo, then to me, and lingered just long enough to make my heart tighten. She said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. I could feel it. This wasn't an invitation born of love, it was tolerance, maybe even territory. Still, I told myself to stay grateful. I reminded myself that she was young, busy, with her own world to manage. Maybe it was only my imagination. Maybe grief made me too sensitive. I made tea, offered her a cup, but she declined with a polite smile, eyes never leaving her phone. The distance between us stretched like an invisible thread. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard them laughing downstairs. I wanted to believe I was part of their family again, but deep down, something whispered that kindness, in this house, might be mistaken for weakness. The first week in their house taught me more than words ever could. On the first evening, Maria seemed warm and charming. She ordered expensive Italian food, poured me a glass of wine, and kept laughing at Nick's every joke. I almost believed she truly cared. But the moment Nick stepped away to answer a phone call, her smile vanished. She set her fork down, her voice suddenly flat. "Next time, just make something simple. We don't need to waste money." I blinked, unsure if I heard her right. She didn't look at me again, just stared at her plate as if I wasn't even there. By the end of that week, the tone of the house had changed completely. I found myself washing dishes, folding laundry, and wiping the counters before anyone asked. It wasn't that they told me to. It was that silence and expectation hung in the air until I filled it with action. Maria began leaving her dirty clothes in the living room, a trail of blouses and skirts across the sofa. "Mom, can you pick these up? I'm running late for court," she called out one morning, not even glancing my way. The word mom felt less like love and more like command. Each morning I woke up early to prepare breakfast for Donald before school. The boy had a sweet smile, always polite, always thanking me for pancakes. That small kindness kept me going. Meanwhile, Maria sat at her vanity, curling her hair, scrolling on her phone while makeup brushes surrounded her like armor. She'd sigh about her clients, her cases, her stress. But she never once asked if I slept well. One morning I burned a slice of toast, just slightly brown, nothing serious. But Maria stormed into the kitchen, heels clicking on the tile. She stared at the plate, then lifted it and threw the toast into the sink. My clients eat better than this. Do you want me to be embarrassed at work? Her voice cut sharp through the quiet kitchen. I wanted to apologize, but the words caught in my throat. I had cooked every meal since I arrived, but that didn't matter. In her eyes, I was no longer a guest. I was part of the furniture, useful, silent, invisible. That night, as I folded laundry in the dim light of the guest room, I realized something painful. Kindness in this house wasn't appreciated, it was exploited. And though I said nothing, a quiet strength began to rise in me, one that Maria hadn't noticed yet. My grandson Donald was a quiet, thoughtful boy, the kind of child who always said thank you and looked people in the eye when he spoke. At first, he smiled often, especially when we baked cookies together or fed the dog in the backyard. But as days turned into weeks, that smile faded little by little. Every night when Maria came home, the air in the house seemed to tighten. Her heels clicked across the floor, her voice sharp, her presence like a storm rolling in. Donald would rush to open his books before she even hung up her coat. She made him study until nearly 11 every night. Her tone wasn't patient or kind. It was like she was fighting some invisible war through her child. "Do you want your teacher to think your mom's stupid?" she snapped one evening when Donald misspelled a word. I froze in the kitchen doorway, hands still holding a dish towel. He stared at the page, tears glistening but silent. I wanted to say something, to tell her to stop, but the fear of turning that storm toward me kept my mouth shut. One afternoon, I was pouring milk for Donald when his little hands trembled and the cup tipped over. Milk splashed across the table. Before I could reach for a napkin, Maria's hand struck the back of his head. Not hard enough to leave a mark, but enough to make him flinch and look down in shame. My heart stopped. It wasn't the slap itself. It was the coldness in her eyes. No apology, no regret. Just irritation, as if her son were an inconvenience that ruined her perfect image. That same evening, I saw her taking a photo. She pulled Donald close, forced a smile, and held up a breakfast plate like we were living in a magazine. The next morning, she posted it on Facebook. Balancing law and motherhood isn't easy, but love makes it possible. I saw the picture on her phone, her hand around the same child she had struck hours before, both faces lit by a false morning sun. My stomach turned. The caption gathered hundreds of likes and heart emojis. I sat there watching Donald eat quietly, his shoulders slumped. The world saw her as a loving mother, a successful lawyer. But I saw something else. A frightened boy and a woman who mistook control for care. And I knew that if I stayed silent much longer, I'd be complicit in her cruelty. Nick worked long hours at the architecture firm, sometimes coming home after midnight with rolled-up blueprints under his arm and exhaustion in his eyes. Whenever he opened the door, Maria would transform. She'd glide across the room, smiling sweetly, her voice soft as honey. She'd pour him wine, kiss his cheek, ask about his day, laugh at his smallest joke. To anyone watching, she looked like the perfect wife. But the moment he went upstairs to shower, that sweetness evaporated like perfume in the heat. "You're lucky I let you live here rent-free," she said one night, tossing the words like a knife. I looked up from my knitting, unsure how to respond. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The tone alone carried enough venom. I thought of answering, of reminding her this was also my son's house, that I'd paid for part of their down payment years ago. But I stayed silent. Some battles are best left for the right time. Slowly, she began building walls between me and Nick. She'd sigh to him over dinner, pretending concern. "Mom's too traditional. She doesn't understand how modern families work." Or she'd smile and say lightly, "She keeps rearranging things in the kitchen. I can't find anything anymore." At first, Nick would just laugh, brushing it off, but I could see it in his eyes. A flicker of doubt, a seed quietly planted. He was too busy to notice the details, the way she rolled her eyes behind his back, the way she kept his phone buzzing with constant updates, the way she shaped the home into her private stage. When he was home, she played the angel. When he wasn't, she ruled like a queen protecting her territory. I started spending more time alone in the small guest room, sipping tea by the window, pretending to read while the laughter from their living room echoed faintly through the walls. Donald sometimes slipped in to sit with me, his head resting on my shoulder, both of us silent, two souls finding peace in quiet rebellion. At night, I could hear Nick and Maria talking downstairs. Her voice was always calm, persuasive, shaping narratives about me with careful precision. I didn't need to hear every word to know their meaning. I was being erased, one conversation at a time. But I didn't fight it, not yet, because I knew something Maria didn't. Time reveals everything. Masks may glitter, but they crack under pressure. And when they do, truth doesn't need to shout. It simply stands there, undeniable. That afternoon, Maria stormed into my room without knocking. Her heels struck the floor like hammers, her perfume sharp in the air. She stood there, arms crossed, her expression coiled tight with contempt. "If you want to raise Donald your way, then maybe you should pay for his school too," she said, every word cutting like glass. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I just looked into her eyes, those cold, metallic eyes that once pretended warmth in front of Nick. There was no pretense now, only ownership, only hostility. I wanted to ask what had happened to kindness, to decency, but I stayed silent. Silence had become my armor. That evening, the house was unusually quiet. Nick was still at work, and Maria had gone out again, claiming a late meeting. I walked past Donald's room and saw the door slightly open. The soft yellow light spilled into the hallway. Inside, he sat cross-legged on the carpet, staring at something in his hands. I stepped closer and froze. On the floor lay a torn piece of paper, his drawing. It was of Maria, him, and their dog in the park. She had a bright smile, drawn with crayon, and his handwriting beneath said, "Mommy and me." But now the paper was ripped down the middle. Donald looked up, his eyes wide and uncertain. "Grandma, why doesn't Mommy like my drawings?" he whispered. "She said they make her desk messy." His voice was small, trembling with confusion more than sadness. I knelt beside him, gathered the torn pieces, and hugged him close. "She's just busy, darling," I said softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. He nodded, but his little hands clung to me as if he knew the truth his mind couldn't say. After he fell asleep, I sat there for a long time, the broken picture in my lap. My heart ached, not just for him, but for the woman my son had married. Someone who mistook control for care, achievement for love. I realized then that what I felt for this family was no longer the warmth of shared affection. It was responsibility, a duty born from love but hardened by necessity. That night marked the quiet turning point. I could no longer simply endure for the sake of peace. Donald's innocence needed protection, even if it meant standing alone. I folded the torn paper carefully, tucking it into my drawer like a silent promise. This cruelty would not go unanswered. To the world, Maria was a star. The golden lawyer of Ohio, they called her. The woman who fought for justice, who stood up for women's rights, who smiled gracefully on television while quoting laws and compassion in the same breath. Newspapers ran her photo often. Confident, stylish, intelligent. Her interviews were polished, her tone calm and measured, her hair always in place. She was the symbol of female strength and success, the woman every young attorney wanted to become. But that was the Maria the world saw. The one I saw was something else entirely. The moment she stepped through the front door, her charm cracked like thin glass. The air in the house shifted. Her heels struck the wooden floor with authority, and her voice, once calm and deliberate, became sharp enough to slice through silence. Donald would freeze at the sound, his pencil halting mid-sentence, while I silently counted the seconds until the storm began. "Where's my briefcase? Who moved my files? Why is the kitchen light still on?" Her words fired one after another, never truly questions, just accusations in disguise. Even the dog sensed it, tail tucked, hiding under the table whenever she came home. Yet in public, she played the perfect part. She spoke at charity events about empowering women, all while disempowering everyone in her home. Cameras adored her. Her colleagues called her an inspiration. Once, a neighbor stopped me outside and said, "You must be so proud to live with someone like Maria." I forced a smile and nodded, because how could I explain that behind those headlines and glossy photos lived a woman whose temper could silence a room? Her double life became unbearable to watch. One morning I overheard her on a call, her voice honeyed, laughing with a client as she promised to fight for fairness. Minutes later, she turned on Donald for spilling a few drops of orange juice, her tone venomous, her patience non-existent. I wanted to ask her what fairness she meant, and for whom. Sometimes, when Nick came home, she slipped right back into her public mask. Calm, attentive, loving. She'd pour him a drink, ask about his projects, even compliment my cooking. But I could see the calculation behind it. Every gesture, every word, designed to keep her image spotless. That night, as I sat in the darkened kitchen listening to her heels click upstairs, I realized the truth. Maria didn't live two lives by accident. She chose it. Power in public, fear in private. And one day, those two worlds would collide. And when they did, not even the perfect lawyer could defend herself. The house that once felt warm and familiar had turned into a stage. And Maria was always the star. Every evening, she swept through the front door like an actress returning from a performance, her smile bright, her perfume heavy, her tone rehearsed. She'd toss her designer bag onto the counter and hold up a bouquet of roses or lilies, saying with false modesty, "Oh, just a little gift from a grateful client." Then she'd hand me the flowers, instructing me to find a new vase because, of course, the old one didn't match the decor. At first, I believed her stories. Lawyers often received gifts, didn't they? But the patterns began to change. The bouquets came too often, the cards were unsigned, and the scent of the perfume lingering on the petals wasn't hers. Then came the receipts. One morning, while folding laundry, I found a spa invoice tucked into her blazer pocket. Later, a hotel bill slipped out from one of her folders. Each time she brushed it off. Business trip, client meeting. But the cities listed, Columbus, Cleveland, even Cincinnati, were too far, too frequent, and the amounts on those credit card statements could have funded a family vacation. She turned our home into her stage set, every corner arranged to showcase her perfect life. When guests arrived, she glowed like a saint. I'd cook the meals, set the table, polish the silverware, but she'd take center stage, laughing lightly, saying things like I taught my mother-in-law to cook European style. Everyone admired her charm. I stood in the background, smiling politely, like a prop in her play. But the moment the door closed behind the last guest, the transformation was instant. Her smile disappeared. She ripped off her silk scarf, tossed it on the table, and muttered, "Dinner was bland, like retirement home food." Then she'd hand me the dishes, ordering me to clean up while she disappeared into the living room, phone pressed to her ear, her voice shifting into a sweet, flirty tone. She'd giggle softly, say things like, "You always make my day better," and I'd stand there, my hands deep in soapy water, pretending not to hear. The house that had once been a home was now just a stage set for Maria's double life, beautiful from the outside, hollow within. Each day, her act grew more polished, but her truth more rotten. And as I wiped the counters and turned off the lights, I realized that every performance ends the same way. The curtain falls, and the lies collapse under their own weight. Donald used to fill the house with laughter. He was curious, creative, always drawing little superheroes on napkins or telling me stories about dogs who could talk. His joy had a rhythm of its own, bright, spontaneous, alive. But after a few months living under Maria's roof, that sound disappeared. The crayons stayed untouched, the sketchbooks closed. He no longer asked to play in the garden or bake cookies. He tiptoed around the house, careful not to make noise, as if every sound might summon a storm. Maria didn't want a son. She wanted a project, a trophy to prove her own perfection. She enrolled Donald in piano, dance, French lessons, and advanced math classes. She bragged endlessly to her friends and online followers. "My son is already advanced for his age," she'd say, her voice filled with pride that didn't belong to love, but to vanity. The boy who once giggled at cartoons now spent his evenings surrounded by flashcards and sheet music. His eyes looked older than 8. One evening, I passed by his room and heard a muffled sob. The door was half open, the light dim. Inside, Donald sat on the floor, surrounded by piles of books and music sheets. His hands covered his face, his small shoulders shaking. I stepped in quietly. He looked up, his eyes red and wet. "Grandma," he whispered. She yelled again. I tried to finish my piano practice, but I'm too tired. His voice cracked as he said the words. I sat down beside him and pulled him into my arms. His body felt fragile, tense, like a string pulled too tight. I stroked his hair and said softly, "It's okay, sweetheart. You did your best." But deep down, I knew this wasn't about a bad lesson or a missed note. It was about a childhood being slowly suffocated by someone who only loved the reflection of herself. As he leaned against me, his tears soaking my sleeve, I looked around the room. The walls covered with certificates, the desk stacked with textbooks, the piano in the corner like a silent witness. I realized that the damage Maria was causing went far beyond the cruelty she showed me. It was creeping into the tender, unguarded heart of a child, stealing his laughter, dimming his light, teaching him that love had to be earned through performance. That night, as I tucked Donald into bed, he whispered, "Grandma, do you think I'm good enough?" I smiled, kissed his forehead, and said, "You've always been more than enough, darling." But after he fell asleep, I sat by the window for a long time, listening to the quiet house. And I knew, with painful certainty, that the true victim of Maria's ambition wasn't me. It was the little boy who had forgotten how to laugh. Nick had started coming home later and later. At first, he blamed work, new clients, late meetings, deadlines, but I could see the truth in his tired eyes. It wasn't work that kept him away. It was peace. The house no longer felt like home to him. Every evening was a battlefield. Every conversation with Maria another trap. When he walked through the door, her tone sharpened like broken glass. "You never make time for us. You don't care about your family." And if he tried to explain, she'd raise her voice, push harder, until finally he stopped defending himself altogether. I heard their fights from the hallway, muffled at first, then loud enough to make the walls tremble. One night, she slammed the bedroom door so hard the picture frames rattled. "I deserve better," she screamed, her voice echoing through the house. Nick didn't yell back. He just stood there, silent, shoulders sagging, as if every word was another stone added to the pile already crushing him. Over time, Maria seized control of everything. The checking accounts, the credit cards, even the house bills. She told him he wasn't responsible enough, that she was protecting their future. I overheard her once, sitting at the dining table with her laptop, saying coldly, "You'll thank me one day for taking over." But there was no partnership in her tone, only power. Nick tried to push back once. I remember hearing him say, quietly but firmly, "I'm still your husband, Maria. We're supposed to make decisions together." She laughed, short and cruel, and replied, "If you ever try to challenge me, I'll take everything in the divorce. You'll lose your son, too." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. I knew at that moment she had found the one thing that could still break him: Donald. After that night, Nick's defiance vanished. He moved like a ghost through the house, polite, cautious, distant. He still tucked Donald into bed and smiled when the boy showed him his drawings, but the spark behind that smile was gone. At dinner, he barely spoke, and Maria filled the silence with her rehearsed perfection. Stories about her successful cases, her grateful clients, her balanced life. I watched my son fade day by day, shrinking under the weight of a marriage that was rotting from the inside. And though Maria's voice carried confidence and control, I could sense the cracks forming beneath her carefully polished act. Because control built on fear is never real control. It's a cage, and one day Every cage opens, one way or another. I began to notice a pattern that made my stomach twist. Maria came home later and later, often after I had already gone to bed or while the house was dark and quiet. Her phone was always face down on the coffee table, locked with some new password she would never share. At first I told myself it was work, courts running late, clients in need. But small things started piling up like stones. The scent of a perfume that was not hers on the collar of a blouse, a receipt peeking out from beneath a car seat, an unfamiliar hotel name on an invoice I found tucked behind a stack of magazines. Each discovery felt like a soft footstep in a corridor that led me to a locked door I had no right to open. One evening I heard laughter from the kitchen, loud and careless. I paused in the hallway listening. Maria sounded drunk, her laugh loose and high. She held the phone away from her face and spoke with someone in a way that made my skin prickle. The words were almost gibberish through the slurred joy, then clear enough to stop my breath. She said that she would make me sign the papers, and that I should not worry, because I knew what she could do. She named a Robert. The name landed in the hall like a coin dropped into a jar. Robert. I knew that name. He was the husband of one of Maria's clients, a man who had been described to me in passing at a neighborhood gathering as wealthy and quiet. I stood very still, the wallpaper pattern swimming in front of my eyes. For a moment I thought I had misunderstood, that fatigue and grief were conspiring to make me imagine conspiracies. Then the phone laughter cut off, and Maria stumbled past the doorway with a wineglass in hand. She looked unsteady, and for a second she was simply human, a woman with a flushed face and a crooked smile. She did not see me. She locked herself in the bedroom, and the sound of her heels faded upstairs. My heart pounded so hard I feared it would wake Donald. That night I could not sleep. I replayed the words as if they were fragile clues on a table. Robert, sign the papers, make her sign. The implication was a bright, ugly thread that stitched itself through every secret I had not yet admitted to myself. If she was meeting this man, if there were late calls and secret payments, what else might be hidden behind the charm the public admired on television? The next morning I opened my journal and wrote slowly, each sentence a small, deliberate step toward reason. If she is playing with fire, then let her burn by her own hands, I wrote. I do not want to hurl accusations without proof. I will wait. I will watch. I will gather what I need. The page felt solid beneath my pen. Making a plan steadied me in a way that anger could not. So I began to observe with careful patience. I noticed the times her car returned, the names on envelopes, the muffled conversations when she thought no one was listening. I started saving receipts I found, noting dates and times, the same way I had once cataloged recipes in a neat ledger. Each small piece of paper became a promise to myself. I would not be a silent witness to damage any longer. I would wait for proof, and when the proof arrived, I would not be the one to look away. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind that begins quietly and ends with a truth you can never unsee. Donald had gone to bed early after finishing his homework, and I went to the study to print out a few extra worksheets his teacher had sent. The house was still, wrapped in that heavy silence that only comes after long days of pretending everything is fine. When I pressed the power button, the family computer came to life with a soft hum. And there it was, already open on the screen. Maria's email account. I froze. Her inbox glowed under the dim light, the mouse resting on a folder labeled Client Files. My first instinct was to close it, to walk away before curiosity turned into guilt. But the subject lines were right there in front of me, impossible to ignore. Confidential, settlement proposal. Robert M. divorce terms. Follow-up, hotel meeting confirmation. For a long moment I didn't move. I wasn't searching for her secrets. They had simply appeared before me, uninvited, like a confession whispered through a keyhole. My pulse quickened, my hand trembling slightly on the mouse. Every email title looked like a door, and behind each, perhaps, the truth that would tear everything apart. I reminded myself who I was, not a gossip, not a vengeful woman. I had raised a family, kept my dignity through storms far greater than this. So I took a breath, steadied my hands, and did what reason demanded. I didn't open anything. I only looked, long enough to understand that something was deeply wrong. The timestamps were late at night, weekends, holidays. The names of certain clients appeared again and again, always accompanied by vague descriptions that didn't belong in professional correspondence. One message subject line made my heart stop. Robert, final signatures and private terms. That name again, like a stain that refused to fade. I closed the laptop gently, my reflection faint in the black screen. The urge to confront her burned at the edge of my throat, but I knew better. Anger might feel powerful, but it rarely wins. Evidence, patience, and timing. Those were the tools I needed. My husband used to say that truth, like oil, always rises to the surface, and in that moment, I believed it. I turned off the light, my heart pounding but my mind clear. Tonight, I told myself, I saw the first crack in her mask, and when masks begin to crack, they never stop. The email thread sat right at the top of the inbox, impossible to miss. The sender and recipient were the same two names repeating again and again, Maria G. and Robert M. The subject line read simply, Settlement Terms, Confidential. My hand hovered over the mouse, the glow of the screen washing over the room. I didn't need to open much. The preview pane already revealed enough to make my breath catch. Attached was a file labeled Divorce Agreement Draft.pdf. And just below, Maria's message, short, intimate, and wrong in a way that went far beyond professionalism. Meet me at the lakeside resort. Let's finalize it. Privately, privately. The word lingered in my mind like smoke. Lawyers didn't finalize privately with clients' spouses, certainly not at a resort. The timestamp matched one of those evenings she'd told Nick she had a late consultation. She had come home hours after midnight that night, her perfume stronger than usual, her smile oddly content. I scrolled through the thread, each message worse than the last. The tone between them wasn't formal or cautious. It was flirtatious, playful in ways that had no place in legal correspondence. You always understand me better than anyone else. Can't wait to see you again after we settle things. It was all there in black and white, in her own words, signed with her initials, MG. The name Robert M. wasn't unfamiliar. I remembered it from a newspaper article Maria had bragged about, a high-profile divorce case involving a wealthy businessman and his estranged wife. Maria had represented the wife, praised publicly for fighting for justice. Now, staring at these emails, I understood what kind of justice she had been fighting for, the kind that lined her pockets and broke her vows. I felt the room tilt slightly. My pulse thudded in my ears. This wasn't gossip or suspicion anymore. It was proof, written, dated, undeniable. Maria, the self-proclaimed champion of women's rights, was having an affair with the very man she was supposed to be defending his wife from. I sat back in the chair, my hands cold against the keyboard. A wave of disbelief washed over me, followed by something quieter, heavier, resolve. I didn't print the emails. I didn't take photos. Not yet. I simply logged out, closed the laptop, and stared at the reflection of my own face in the dark screen. The truth had shown itself, and it no longer needed me to chase it. I whispered to myself, barely audible in the still room. So this is who you really are, Maria. And deep down, beneath the hurt, a steady calm began to grow. Because once you see the truth, you can never unsee it. And once the mask falls, it never fits again. I knew exactly what not to do. My hands trembled above the keyboard, but my mind stayed clear. I didn't take screenshots. I didn't download, forward, or copy a single file. Every instinct screamed to preserve the evidence, but I had lived long enough to know that one impulsive move could backfire. Any action inside her account could be twisted into unauthorized access. And Maria was the kind of woman who would use even the smallest misstep to her advantage. So I took the safest road. I looked at the clock on the wall, 10:47 p.m., a Tuesday, and quietly noted the details in my mind. I closed the email window, logged out of the computer, and shut it down. The soft hum of the machine faded into silence. My heart was still pounding, but I refused to let panic guide me. I stood up, smoothed my blouse, and gently closed the door to the study. Then I went to find Nick. He was in the living room, half asleep on the couch, the TV still glowing. I kept my voice calm. "Nick, the computer seems to have a glitch," I said lightly. "Maybe you should have someone check it tomorrow." He nodded without much thought, rubbing his eyes. I smiled faintly, pretending nothing was wrong. What I didn't tell him, not yet, was that the glitch I'd found wasn't a technical one. It was moral, ethical, and personal. But I needed to protect both him and myself. The law was on my side only if I stayed clean, precise, and patient. The next morning, without drama or accusation, Nick called an old friend, an IT specialist he had known since college, someone he trusted completely. When the man arrived, he didn't bring gossip or questions. He brought paperwork. A formal authorization form sat at the top of his briefcase, followed by a set of sealed forensic tools. This wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about documentation, precision, and legality. They both sat in the study, the morning light spilling across the desk. The specialist explained each step clearly. "We'll create a forensic image of the hard drive," he said. "No data will be altered. Everything remains intact." Nick nodded, signing the consent form as a legal co-owner of the household computer. From that moment on, every minute was logged. The start time, the serial number of the device, the verification hash attached to the data. The process followed what professionals call the chain of custody, ensuring that no evidence could ever be questioned in court. The specialist connected his equipment, a small, silent device that copied the entire drive sector by sector. Each step was measured, timed, and sealed. When the imaging completed, he calculated and recorded the hash value, a unique digital fingerprint proving that the copy was an exact match to the original. Then he printed a short summary and placed it in a plastic folder, both men signing at the bottom. The technical review revealed something far worse than anyone had expected. Maria had used her corporate account to send case files, confidential divorce documents, through unsecured personal email channels. Even more disturbing were the attachments, private photos, clearly unrelated to any professional matter, sent to an address belonging to Robert M. Each message carried digital traces, headers, timestamps, cache fragments, linking back to her computer. Nothing was hacked or planted. Everything was already there, preserved by her own negligence. When the procedure ended, the IT specialist powered down the machine, labeled the evidence drive, and sealed it in a tamper-proof bag. He handed Nick a copy of the report and explained calmly, "This is now a documented forensic backup. No data was accessed beyond what was visible. You've done everything by the law." Nick thanked him quietly, his expression heavy but resolute. There was no satisfaction in being right, only the gravity of knowing. I stood by the doorway watching as both men signed the final line. The signatures were neat, deliberate, final. The evidence was now official, irrefutable, and untainted. In that moment, I realized that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through paper trails, timestamps, and careful hands that know how to preserve truth without touching it. The forensic copy was sealed with care, one stored safely in Nick's home vault, another set aside for our attorney should the day come. Everything was handled quietly, properly, without confrontation. There was no shouting, no accusations, just evidence, cold, factual, undeniable. I realized then that I hadn't exposed Maria at all. She had done it herself. Her downfall was written not by my hands, but by her arrogance, her belief that she was untouchable. She had built her reputation on control, yet it was her carelessness that undid her. Every email, every attachment, every timestamp told the story she thought she could hide. And unlike rumors or suspicions, this story needed no embellishment. The truth stood on its own, clear, clean, and legal. From that moment, there was no more guessing, no more tension hanging in the air. We had facts, not feelings. A legitimate chain of evidence that could protect Nick, shield Donald, and end the cycle of manipulation that had poisoned our home for years. It wasn't revenge, it was defense. Quiet, steady, lawful defense. As the IT report was filed away, I closed the laptop gently and looked around the house. The same walls that had once echoed with arguments now sat in uneasy silence. For the first time in months, I felt calm, not victorious, not even relieved, just calm, like the eye of a storm that had finally started to move on. I went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and waited as it began to hum. The simple act of making tea felt grounding, something steady amid the chaos that had defined our days. When the water boiled, I poured it over the leaves, the soft steam rising like a sigh. I sat down by the window, notebook in hand, and wrote one final line beneath the evening's date. The truth has found its voice. All that's left is to wait for the day it speaks before everyone. I closed the notebook, feeling its weight in my palm. Outside, the night was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows clarity. I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't need to rush, to prove, or to confront. The truth had already begun its work, slowly, inevitably, like dawn spreading across the horizon. And when that day came, when light touched every hidden corner, Maria would have no one to blame but herself. I called Ethan the next morning, my voice steady but low. He had been one of my brightest students years ago, sharp, disciplined, and quietly observant. Now he ran a licensed private investigation firm in Cleveland, the kind that worked strictly by the book. When he picked up, I didn't waste time with small talk. "Ethan," I said, "I need you to follow someone. Her name is Maria, but listen carefully. Everything must be done legally." There was a pause, then his calm reply. "Understood. Public spaces only. No tracking devices, no wiretaps, no trespassing." His tone was professional, detached. Exactly what I needed. We arranged to meet at a cafe near the courthouse that afternoon. Ethan arrived early, notebook in hand, wearing the same patient expression I remembered from my classroom. Over coffee, I laid out the situation in plain words. The emails, the hotel receipts, the late nights. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't have to. Facts, when arranged in a straight line, already told the story. Ethan listened carefully, then nodded. "We'll build a timeline," he said. "A log of where she goes, when and who she meets, all from legal vantage points. I'll also collect receipts or open source confirmations when possible. You'll have documentation clean enough to stand in court." That phrase, "clean enough to stand in court," felt like a lifeline. I trusted him completely. He knew the fine line between evidence and intrusion, between pursuit and entrapment. More importantly, he understood me. The woman who had once lectured him about ethics, now leaning on those same principles to survive. Within 2 days, he began his observation routine. From a discreet distance, he logged every pattern with precision. The times Maria left home, the routes she took, the cafes and hotels she visited. He noted license plates, snapped photos only from public areas, and filed everything with timestamps. Each evening, he emailed me a short summary, factual, neutral, clinical. Left home at 6:45 p.m., arrived downtown hotel at 7:10. Same black Mercedes seen 2 nights in a row. Male driver unidentified. I read each report in silence, my tea cooling beside me. There was no satisfaction in being right, only confirmation of what I already suspected. Yet knowing Ethan was out there, calm and methodical, gave me a strange sense of peace. Choosing him had been the right decision. He respected the law, respected truth, and respected the boundary between justice and vengeance. As I set his reports neatly in a folder, I told myself one thing: storms destroy what's weak, but they also reveal what's solid. And when the time came, our case would stand, not on anger, but on proof. For 3 weeks, Ethan worked with the quiet precision of a surgeon. Each evening I received a short report in my inbox, factual, time-stamped, stripped of any emotion. The evidence spoke for itself. There were photographs of Maria entering upscale hotels, boutique spas, and private restaurants, all taken from lawful public vantage points, each image marked with date, time, and location. Her routine had a rhythm, predictable yet damning. Late afternoon meetings, evening arrivals, departures just past midnight. The pattern became undeniable. On the 5th day, Ethan sent a short video clip. It showed Maria walking through the glass doors of a lakeside hotel, accompanied by a tall man in a dark suit. They paused briefly at the front desk before disappearing into the elevator. Later, another clip captured them descending together, smiling, stepping out toward the hotel's private restaurant. The footage was clear, filmed from the public corridor. No intrusion, no ambiguity. Alongside the footage came something heavier: physical proof. Ethan's report included copies of receipts and open-source confirmations obtained through legitimate channels. One hotel staff member, responding to a public inquiry, confirmed a transaction that matched Maria's corporate credit card number. Another document, a spa receipt signed in her handwriting, listed 2 guests for a couples session. Everything was cross-referenced, dated, and catalogued, not as gossip, but as evidence that could hold under scrutiny. Every photo, every bill, every timestamp became a puzzle piece, and by the end of the 3rd week, the full picture emerged. Maria's business meetings were not about clients or consultations. They were private encounters, repeated, coordinated, and involving several men, all with professional connections to her legal practice. Each meeting blurred another line of ethics, turning her professional reputation into a shadow of deceit. Ethan never speculated. He didn't need to. The documentation was self-explanatory. One evening, his email came with a single sentence: "She's not hiding. She simply believes no one dares to look." I read that line again and again. It wasn't just infidelity, it was hubris, the same arrogance that had driven her to misuse her position, convinced she could manipulate both law and people without consequence. By the end of the 3rd week, the folder on my desk was thick, its edges marked with paper clips and sticky notes. The puzzle was complete, and so was my resolve. Maria's empire of appearances had started to crack, not because anyone attacked it, but because the truth had begun to illuminate every corner she once believed untouchable. Ethan worked with the precision of a man who knew exactly where the legal lines were drawn and how never to cross them. Every photograph, every second of footage came from public areas: sidewalks, hotel lobbies, restaurant entrances. If he needed to step inside a semi-private area, he requested permission first, always documenting who granted it. There were no hidden microphones, no wiretaps, no hacking into private accounts. Everything he did was clean, traceable, and defensible. Each file he sent was meticulously labeled with the date, time, and GPS location. Alongside every video came a short technical note: lighting conditions, distance, and device specifications. Ethan maintained a detailed activity log, recording every moment of collection and transfer. The files were stored on an encrypted external drive, its integrity verified with digital hashes. He made 2 copies, one for his secured archive, another for our records. Every step was documented, so if ever questioned, the chain of evidence would hold up under scrutiny. We didn't rely on intuition, we sought advice. Nick and I reached out to a trusted attorney, one experienced in disciplinary law and civil procedure. We explained the situation carefully: Maria's misconduct, the mounting evidence, and Ethan's lawful methods. The lawyer listened, took notes, and said calmly, "You're on the right track. But remember, chain of custody must remain intact. No manipulation, no alteration, and under no circumstance should you access her private devices or accounts. Even the truth can lose its power if it's obtained illegally." Those words became our compass. From that day on, we followed them to the letter. Ethan prepared signed handover forms each time he delivered new material. The data logs were reviewed, printed, and stored in sealed folders. Every document, every file, every timestamp was treated not as gossip or ammunition, but as legal proof, clean, verifiable, and admissible if the time came to present it before the Bar Association or a civil court. It was strange, the calm that came from doing things the right way. There was no more fear of being accused of meddling or crossing lines. Instead, there was a quiet confidence, the assurance that when Maria's secrets finally came to light, they would do so under the full authority of law. When I looked at the growing folder of evidence, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt prepared, because the goal was never to destroy her. It was to protect what was left: Nick's dignity, Donald's stability, and the truth itself. And now, that truth had a structure strong enough to stand in any courtroom, untouched by her manipulation or mind. It happened just as we thought things couldn't get any heavier. Nick had been pushing himself too hard: long hours, sleepless nights, the stress of holding his collapsing marriage together. One rainy evening, while driving home from a late client meeting, his car skidded off the road. The injuries were not life-threatening, but serious enough: a fractured arm, mild concussion, and bruises that told a story of exhaustion more than recklessness. When the hospital called, my heart dropped. I rushed there immediately, while Maria only sent a short message. "I'll come tomorrow if I can." She did come. Once. Her visit lasted barely 15 minutes. The nurses later told me they had rarely seen a wife so detached. She entered the room, phone in hand, heels clicking on the floor, and didn't look at Nick until he greeted her first. Their conversation was short and tense. When a nurse politely reminded her to lower her voice, Maria snapped. She grabbed the meal tray off the bedside table, shouted something about being treated like a criminal, and hurled it against the wall. The tray hit the edge of the bed, scattering food onto the floor and onto Nick. Security was called immediately, and the incident was logged in the hospital's system. The hallway camera had captured the entire scene. According to hospital policy, Nick, as the patient, had the right to request a copy of both the incident report and the security footage. We filed the request that same afternoon, following every legal and administrative step, signing consent forms, citing the patient's rights section, and ensuring that the materials were archived properly. The charge nurse, who had witnessed everything, agreed to write an official statement documenting Maria's behavior. The footage wasn't violent in a criminal sense, but it was damning in every human way. Watching her throw the tray, seeing the shock and humiliation on Nick's face, it told more truth than any written report could. It wasn't just infidelity anymore. It was emotional cruelty, public disrespect, and an utter absence of empathy. That hospital report became one of the most powerful pieces in our file, not because it accused Maria of a crime, but because it revealed her character under real pressure. The woman who played the perfect lawyer in public had, for a brief moment, shown who she truly was when no camera was meant to see. Only this time, the cameras were not ours. They were the hospital's neutral, legal, and irrefutable dot. When the evidence was finally solid, the photos, the public videos, the receipts, and the hospital report, we knew it was time. Not for confrontation, not for revenge, but for truth. That was when the idea of the dinner was born. A carefully planned, legally safe event where Maria's two worlds, the polished public image and the hidden private one, would quietly collide. We decided to host it at the community hall of Nick's old school. It had a projector, a large screen, and a sound system that could play every frame clearly. Ethan arranged the technical side, testing the connections and securing a locked drive containing the verified files. The footage wasn't edited or dramatized. It would speak for itself. I wanted no manipulation, no exaggeration, only the truth as it was recorded. Nick agreed to attend as the guest of honor. He would represent the family, calm and dignified, while I handled the simple catering: homemade dishes, modestly set tables, nothing showy. That simplicity was intentional. Maria had always associated prestige with glamour, and the contrast would unsettle her before the first image even appeared. Ethan took on the role of evidence custodian. His task was to operate the projector and ensure that every file came directly from the sealed copy, played in sequence when I gave the signal. Our lawyer, seated discreetly near the front, would monitor every step, ready to intervene if the situation escalated. The event was not a spectacle. It was a lawful unveiling. We also arranged for a trusted family member to act as the official videographer. The purpose was not humiliation, but documentation, a neutral record of what happened and how people reacted. Should the case later reach the disciplinary board or civil court, that footage would serve as unaltered proof that the presentation had been factual, not defamatory. The guest list was crafted with precision. We invited Maria's colleagues, two of her clients, and several family friends she often boasted to about her perfect life. Each invitation carried a tone of formality, a small celebration, a chance to thank those who supported the family during difficult times. We scheduled the viewing at the midpoint of the evening, exactly when she would be present and least suspicious. A contingency plan was in place, too. If Maria decided not to show up, the material would be delivered privately to the Legal Ethics Board instead. Either way, the truth would surface, publicly, officially, and within the boundaries of law. When everything was ready, I stood in the empty hall the night before, looking at the blank white screen. Tomorrow, it would no longer be blank. It would become a mirror. And in that mirror, Maria would finally see herself as the world would see her. That morning, Maria's voice sliced through the quiet like the clink of a wine glass before a toast. She called while I was wiping down the kitchen counter, her tone dripping with entitlement, the same way it always had when she mistook obedience for weakness. "Get everything ready for my birthday. Rooms, food, seating for 22 people. My family and friends are on their way." No greeting, no thank you. Just an order, crisp and careless, as if I were part of the catering staff. Through the window, the sunlight streamed across the dining table, glinting off the framed photo of my late husband. His smile in that picture had always steadied me. I looked at it now, then back at the phone and answered softly. "Of course, Maria, leave it to me." There was a pause on the line, a moment of silence she didn't quite understand. Then she hung up, satisfied, already moving on to her next demand somewhere else. I stood still for a while, the warmth of the sunlight wrapping around me like a calm I hadn't felt in years. There was no anger left, no tremor in my hands, no sting behind my eyes, only a deep, steady peace. Because the irony was perfect. Today, of all days, she had chosen her own stage, her birthday, her audience, her perfect little theater of success, and I, quietly standing in the wings, would only need to lift the curtain. Outside, the house was already stirring. Delivery vans pulled up, staff unloaded trays and linens. I supervised politely, checking lists, making sure everything was precise, not as her servant, but as someone preparing the final scene of a play that had already been written. The guests would come dressed for celebration, expecting champagne and laughter. What they would get instead was the truth. Simple, unvarnished, undeniable. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass door. My expression surprised me. There was no bitterness, no gloating, just composure. Years ago, I might have cried or shouted or prayed for justice. But justice, I had learned, does not always need a fight. Sometimes, it just needs timing. I straightened the tablecloth, adjusted a vase, and looked once more at my husband's photo. "It's time," I whispered, not as a declaration of war, but as a promise. To myself, to Nick, to the boy upstairs who still believed in right and wrong. And so, as Maria's guests prepared to celebrate her, I prepared to let the truth celebrate itself. I didn't order catering this year. There were no trays of lobster, no champagne towers, no servers dressed in black and white the way Maria liked to stage every event, as if elegance could disguise emptiness. Instead, I cooked. A simple dinner, quiet and honest. Roasted chicken seasoned with herbs from the garden, a bowl of fresh salad, a homemade apple pie cooling by the window, and a pot of steaming tea. It was enough. Nick set the table with quiet focus, his arm still in a sling but determined to help. Donald insisted on hanging the balloons himself, stretching on tiptoe to tape them unevenly along the wall. The house didn't look grand, it looked alive. There was warmth in the air, not the forced kind Maria cultivated for show, but the real warmth that lives in small human moments. It was peace, fragile, temporary, but real. As the aroma of roasted chicken filled the kitchen, I wheeled the borrowed screen into the center of the living room. It was larger than I expected, the kind used for school assemblies. Solid, professional, impersonal. I connected it to the small encrypted drive Ethan had given me. Inside that drive were the fragments of a double life: photos, videos, emails, and receipts. The pieces of truth she had scattered carelessly, now gathered in one place. The cables clicked into place. I took the remote and pressed the button. The screen flickered once, twice, and then came to life. Blue glow, faint hum. On it appeared the first frame of the presentation Ethan had prepared, clean and simple. White background, black text, centered perfectly. "Happy birthday, Maria." The words glowed softly in the dim room. I stood there for a long moment watching them. The irony wasn't cruel, it was poetic. A message that, at first glance, looked like affection, but beneath it carried the weight of revelation. It was the calm before truth stepped into the light. I tested the playback, scrolling through the files one last time. Everything worked flawlessly. Video clips in chronological order, photographs tagged by date, receipts and correspondence arranged like chapters of a story. Her story. There would be no need for speeches, no need for accusations. The screen would do all the talking. When I turned off the display, the room fell silent again. Outside, dusk was gathering, the kind of gentle gray that makes everything seem suspended. I smoothed the tablecloth, adjusted a vase of daisies, and inhaled the faint sweetness of apple pie. This wasn't a feast. It was a reckoning, served warm with tea and honesty. At 6 o'clock sharp, the house began to fill. Cars lined the driveway, heels clicked against the tiles, and voices echoed through the hall. Familiar, polished voices that spoke in compliments and half-truths. Maria's world had arrived. Colleagues in tailored suits, former clients dripping in jewelry, socialites who called her an inspiration, a powerhouse, a role model for modern women. They laughed too loudly, embraced too tightly, and glanced around for the next person to impress. Then the doorbell rang. Once, clear and sharp like the opening note of a performance. Every head turned. I opened the door, and there she was. Maria stood on the doorstep as if she were stepping onto a red carpet. She wore a crimson dress that shimmered under the chandelier light, her lips painted in the same daring shade. The perfume hit first, strong, assertive, expensive, the kind that didn't enter a room so much as claim it. She smiled, wide and practiced, raising one hand in a graceful wave as cameras clicked from guests' phones. "I can't believe you did all this for me, Mom. You're finally learning style." The room erupted in laughter. Champagne glasses clinked. Someone shouted, "Cheers to Maria!" And for a moment, it was like every other celebration she had ever orchestrated. Loud, showy, carefully curated. But beneath the laughter, something trembled. A few guests looked around, puzzled. The decor didn't match the usual opulence they expected. No silver catering trays, no crystal centerpieces, no waiters gliding around. Instead, the table was simple: roasted chicken, salad, apple pie, warm tea. It wasn't poor, but it was real, and that made it strange to them, unsettling even. Maria noticed it too. I saw her eyes flick across the room, confusion flickering behind her perfect smile. For a brief second, the mask slipped, just long enough for me to glimpse the woman beneath, nervous and unsure. But then the laughter swelled again, and she straightened, tossing her hair like a queen reclaiming her throne. She floated through the crowd, kissing cheeks, exchanging compliments that sounded rehearsed. "You look stunning, darling." "Oh, I've been swamped with work, you know how it is." Every gesture choreographed, every sentence designed for admiration. But I could sense it. The energy was off. People were polite, yes, but distant. They felt the tension in the air, the kind that hums right before a storm. Standing by the kitchen doorway, I watched her from afar. In that moment, she was everything she believed herself to be: radiant, adored, untouchable. Yet she had no idea she was already standing on the edge of her own undoing. She raised her glass high, the diamond bracelet catching the light like a final flare before darkness. "To success, family, and integrity," she declared, her voice bright and confident, the practiced tone of a woman who believed she was still in control. That was the moment I knew. The timing was perfect. My fingers found the small remote hidden inside the sleeve of my cardigan. I pressed the button, a quiet click swallowed by the last echoes of laughter. The screen came to life behind her, humming softly. At first, the image was harmless: a festive slide that read, "Happy Birthday, Maria," in gold letters. Guests chuckled, raising their glasses again, assuming it was part of the celebration. But within seconds, the slide faded into black, then to motion. The video began. On the screen, Maria appeared. The same red lipstick, the same confident posture. But not in this house. She was in a hotel suite, wrapped in the arms of a man no one recognized. Her voice filled the room, smooth but cold. "Don't worry. I'll make your wife sign anything you want." The laughter died instantly. A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. The music still played faintly from the speakers, absurdly cheerful against the silence that had fallen. I didn't look at Maria. I didn't have to. I could feel her body stiffen from across the room, the shock freezing her in place. The video continued, seamless and undeniable. Receipts from luxury resorts appeared on screen. Dates, amounts, her signature visible in bold ink. Then came screenshots of emails sent from her company account, confidential case files forwarded to private addresses. Finally, a photo sequence. Maria accepting jewelry, her smile wide, her hand outstretched, diamonds glinting like evidence. No narration, no accusation, just truth frame by frame. The guests stared, eyes wide, mouths open. Some shifted uncomfortably, whispering to one another. Others simply stood frozen, watching their role model unravel in real time. The silence was so sharp I could hear the faint buzz of the projector. Nick didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just looked down, his jaw tight, as if he'd already known but still had to face the final confirmation. Donald stood near me, confused, clutching a balloon that had begun to deflate. Then came the moment that broke her. Maria lunged toward the screen, shouting, "Turn that off! This is fake!" Her voice cracked, not with anger, but with fear. The woman who had built her life on control was suddenly powerless, cornered by her own reflection. And as the video ended, the last image lingered for a few seconds. A still shot of Maria's confident smile from a television interview, under which Ethan had placed one final line of text. "Integrity begins where pretense ends." Maria stood frozen, her painted smile collapsing into something raw and unguarded. Her hand trembled as she reached for the remote, but it was useless. I had already removed the batteries hours ago. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector cooling down. The woman who once commanded courtrooms now looked small, trapped under the weight of her own evidence. Nick sat in the corner, his face pale but steady. There was no rage left in him, no grief. Only exhaustion, and something close to release. The truth, now visible to everyone, had lifted the burden he had carried alone for too long. He met my eyes briefly, and in that moment words were unnecessary. Around the room, whispers began to ripple like cracks spreading across glass. One of Maria's male colleagues muttered under his breath, "She used firm resources for this?" A former client shook her head, disbelief shadowing her face. Another woman, trembling, covered her mouth with her hand, then discreetly lowered her phone to record, as though history itself needed proof of this fall. Maria finally turned toward me, eyes wide, chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. Her voice caught in her throat. "You planned this," she rasped. "You—" But I didn't let her finish. I picked up the teacup that had been sitting beside me all evening, its warmth seeping faintly into my fingers. I raised it slowly, my voice calm, low and sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Happy birthday, Maria." I paused, letting the words settle. "To the most brilliant lawyer in Ohio, now everyone knows how you win your cases." A collective exhale filled the room, half shock, half recognition. No one clapped, no one defended her. The weight of reality was too heavy, too clear. Maria's lips parted, but no sound came. The tears didn't fall. Not yet. Pride held them hostage, even as her empire cracked in front of her peers. She looked around desperately for an ally, but all she found were lowered eyes and the cold glare of phone cameras. I took a small sip of tea. It was bitter, almost metallic, the kind of bitterness that lingers at the back of the tongue, but beneath it was something else, a quiet sweetness. Not triumph, not revenge, just balance. No one spoke after that. The music had stopped long ago, and the silence itself became the final verdict. That night, justice wasn't served in a courtroom or written on a legal brief. It was poured in porcelain, steaming and still. By morning, the world had already decided. The video, the one from the birthday dinner, had spread like wildfire across the internet. Someone at the party, an old colleague of Maria's, had posted it on Facebook with a single caption: "When arrogance meets its own mirror." Within hours, it was everywhere. Local news outlets picked it up first, then national blogs and gossip forums. Headlines screamed across every platform: "Ohio divorce lawyer caught in scandal with clients." The thumbnail was the same everywhere: Maria in her red dress, frozen mid-gesture, eyes wide, surrounded by the stunned faces of her guests. The image became viral before breakfast. On Twitter, threads exploded. "So this is how she won her cases?" one comment read, followed by another. "Justice, finally." Screenshots of her law firm's website circulated with users dissecting her speeches about ethics and women's empowerment. Someone dug up her old interviews where she preached about integrity. Others paired them side by side with clips from the video. The contrast was brutal, the perfect downfall written in pixels. News stations replayed the footage on evening broadcasts, blurring faces of the guests but leaving Maria's expression untouched. "A respected Ohio attorney faces ethical and personal scandal," one anchor announced with professional detachment, while the footage looped quietly behind her. The red dress, once a symbol of power, now looked like a warning. Maria's firm released a short statement before noon. "We are aware of allegations concerning attorney Maria Carson and have initiated an internal review." But the internet didn't wait for reviews. It rarely does. Comment sections flooded faster than any official response could catch up. Even her supporters, colleagues, acquaintances, former clients began to distance themselves. Nick showed me the articles on his phone, his expression unreadable. Donald, too young to understand, just asked why people were saying mean things about his mom online. I only told him, gently, "Sometimes people forget that truth always finds a way to be seen." Then I turned off my phone, unplugged the television, and went to the kitchen. The morning sunlight spilled through the window, golden and quiet. I filled the kettle, listening to the steady hiss of water warming, a sound far more peaceful than all the noise outside. As I poured the tea, I thought about how storms work: loud, violent, unstoppable. But sometimes justice isn't a thunderclap. It's a quiet morning after, when the air finally clears and the sky looks cleaner than before. I sat by the window, hands wrapped around my cup, and whispered to myself, "Some tempests don't need to roar. They rise on their own, when pride grows too tall." 2 days later, the silence broke. Not online, but on paper. The Ohio State Bar Association released an official notice announcing an ethics investigation into attorney Maria Carson. The letter cited two specific provisions: Rule 1.7, conflict of interest, and Rule 8.4, professional misconduct. The words were clear, cold, and absolute, the kind that strip away reputation faster than any rumor ever could. Ethan and Nick's attorney delivered the forensic evidence packet that same morning: the verified video, the emails, and the logs showing Maria's use of her firm's official account to send confidential client files to her personal contact. Every file was time-stamped, authenticated, and neatly labeled. Nothing speculative, nothing emotional, just facts laid bare in black and white. The committee moved fast. A summons was issued, requiring Maria to appear in person for questioning. Pending review, her license to practice law was suspended, a temporary measure, but one that carried the weight of humiliation. For someone who had built her entire identity on control, authority, and prestige, this was worse than any verdict a judge could hand down. When the notice reached her, Maria reacted exactly as I expected. She stormed into Nick's house, still clinging to the last fragments of her pride, shouting accusations as though volume could rewrite evidence. "This is a personal attack by my in-laws!" she screamed, waving the suspension letter in her hand. "They're trying to ruin me because they're jealous!" But the paper didn't care. The signatures were hers. The digital headers on every email traced back to her firm's servers. The credit card transactions, dinners, hotel stays, spa visits, all tied to her name, her card, her authorization. Technology, unlike people, doesn't lie. The local news covered the story that night, their tone formal but merciless. Attorney under ethics review for misconduct involving client relationships, the anchor read. The photo behind her showed Maria entering the committee office, sunglasses on, jaw tight, surrounded by cameras. Her firm quietly removed her profile from their website. The once glowing biography that boasted of courtroom victories and unshakable moral values vanished overnight. Clients withdrew cases, one after another, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Nick didn't gloat. He simply folded the newspaper, sighed, and placed it on the counter. "I guess she finally met her own law," he murmured. As for me, I made tea again, this time not in triumph, but in quiet reflection. Justice, I thought, has many forms. Sometimes it wears a robe and speaks in verdicts. Other times it comes in the form of a letter, written, signed, and sealed with the weight of truth. The media didn't just report, they feasted. Within days, every local station and newspaper had plastered Maria's name across their headlines. The woman once praised as Ohio's golden divorce lawyer was now being called the fallen queen of family law. Her photo, that same one from the ethics committee building, ran alongside every article. Maria stepping out into the sunlight, head down, sunglasses on, her once steady hands trembling as she pushed past the reporters. What had once been admiration turned to outrage. Former clients, mostly women who had trusted her to protect their rights, began filing complaints of their own. They accused her of exploiting confidential information to manipulate or seduce their husbands during divorce negotiations. Their testimonies were chillingly similar: late-night meetings, overly personal messages, inappropriate comfort. The Ohio bar's hotline was flooded. Legal forums buzzed with debates. Some attorneys defended her as a victim of her own ambition, but most agreed Maria had crossed a line that could not be defended. Then came the Legal Watch article, the one that sealed her fate. The headline read, "Maria H. Proof that brilliance without integrity is self-destruction." The journalist described her rise and fall like a Greek tragedy, a woman whose intelligence had dazzled everyone until arrogance made her blind to her own reflection. The piece ended with a haunting line: "When the law loses its conscience, it loses its power." For 2 straight days, every channel replayed the same footage: Maria leaving the disciplinary office, ignoring shouted questions. "Do you admit to misconduct, Miss Carson? Will you resign? Did you have an affair with your client?" She said nothing, just tightened her coat and walked faster, her posture crumbling under the weight of cameras and whispers. Nick watched one of those broadcasts in silence. Donald was at school, and the house felt too quiet. When the segment ended, he turned off the TV and said softly, "I used to think she was unstoppable." His tone wasn't angry, it was weary, the voice of someone who had finally stopped fighting illusions. I stood beside him, still holding my cup of tea. On the screen, Maria's face froze mid-frame, that same mix of defiance and fear that always shows up right before a person realizes the fall has truly begun. I didn't feel triumph, not satisfaction, just a deep, quiet sadness, the kind that comes when you watch someone destroy everything they once stood for. Because in the end, it wasn't me who brought Maria down. It was Maria, undone not by betrayal but by her own emptiness. After years of walking on eggshells, Nick finally did what he should have done long ago. He filed for divorce. This time he wasn't alone or confused. He had his own attorney, one recommended by Ethan, someone who understood both the emotional and legal weight of the case. The filing was clean, factual, and calm. No anger, no exaggeration, just the truth, documented and undeniable. Inside the petition, Nick's lawyer included statements from the hospital nurse who had witnessed Maria's outburst, as well as the verified evidence of her infidelity: the photos, the receipts, the video that had already gone public. It was more than enough. Within weeks, the court granted Nick temporary custody of Donald while the case proceeded. Maria, under suspension and public scrutiny, had little ground left to stand on. When the order was finalized, Nick didn't celebrate. He simply exhaled, a deep, shuddering breath, as though years of invisible chains had finally fallen away. I watched him pack a few essentials for Donald: his favorite books, the small blue blanket he'd had since birth, a box of toy cars. The boy hugged his father's leg tightly, then ran to me, eyes bright. We drove to my old house on the edge of town, the same small home where my husband and I had spent 40 peaceful years together. The garden had grown wild in my absence. The wooden porch creaked a little, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine from the vines that had climbed higher than the roof. But to Donald, it was magic. As soon as he stepped inside, he looked around with a wide grin and said, "Grandma, it smells like peace here." I laughed softly, brushing his hair back. "That's because it is, darling. It always has been." That night, after Donald had fallen asleep with his toy car clutched in hand, Nick and I sat on the porch under the quiet glow of the old lantern. The air was cool, the crickets steady. For the first time in years, his face looked calm. Not happy, not sad, just free. He turned to me and said quietly, "I always thought justice was loud, Mom. Angry, explosive, but you proved it's quiet and final." I didn't answer right away. I just smiled because I knew he was right. True justice doesn't need noise or revenge. It arrives like the wind, steady, unseen, but powerful enough to clear the air. And in that stillness, I finally felt it too. The weight lifting, the peace returning. Not victory, something gentler, closure. When the suspension became permanent, the last of Maria's titles disappeared with it. The license, the one she used to frame proudly on her office wall, was now void. Her firm terminated her contract, clients withdrew their cases, and every stream of income she had dried up in a matter of weeks. The glamorous life that had once defined her, designer suits, weekend spa trips, charity galas, evaporated, leaving only invoices and debt. She tried to fight it first. She called old contacts, sent messages to colleagues, begged for a referral or a second chance, but no one replied. One by one, her friends stopped answering. Some blocked her number entirely. Others offered polite excuses before disappearing. Even the law partners who had once toasted her victories refused to acknowledge her name. The mortgage company seized her suburban mansion when the payments stopped. The red brick house that had hosted countless dinner parties now sat empty, its garden overgrown, the mailbox stuffed with unclaimed letters. Maria packed what little she could fit into her car, a few suits, a handful of jewelry, her degree in a cracked frame, and moved into a modest apartment in downtown Columbus. The place was small, silent, and impersonal. No one greeted her in the hallways. The neighbors didn't care who she was or who she used to be. When she passed them on the stairs, they only nodded briefly before turning away. For the first time in her life, Maria existed without an audience. The tabloids stopped writing about her months later. The headlines moved on to newer scandals, younger faces. But the internet never forgets. Type her name, and the old stories still appeared. Lawyer loses license after client affair scandal. The comments were still there too, sharp, mocking, merciless. Some nights she would open her laptop and scroll through them, her reflection faint in the dark screen. The same hands that once wrote winning arguments now trembled on the keyboard. She'd type long justifications in the Notes app, explanations no one would ever read, then delete them one by one. Her days blurred into a slow routine: coffee, silence, and regret. The woman who had once spoken about justice and empowerment now spent afternoons staring at the city skyline from her narrow balcony, wondering when she had crossed the line between ambition and destruction. There was no audience left to blame, no mirror to admire, only the echo of her own choices. A few months later, life found its rhythm again. Not the old rhythm, but something gentler, steadier. I returned to the small house where my husband and I had once built our quiet world. The walls still held traces of laughter. The creak of the wooden floor still sounded like memory. The garden, though overgrown, waited patiently for my hands. I spent the morning pulling weeds, turning the soil, and planting lavender along the fence. The same lavender Maria once called too rustic. Its scent rose into the cool air, soft and honest, exactly the kind of beauty that doesn't need to be praised to exist. Donald comes over every weekend now. He's growing fast. His laughter fills the house the way sunlight fills the kitchen. We read together by the window, his little finger following each word as I turn the pages. He no longer flinches at loud sounds, no longer looks over his shoulder when someone raises their voice. Instead, he smiles easily, like a child should. Every time he laughs, it feels like a small victory. The quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need applause. Sometimes Nick joins us too. He tends to the garden while I make tea. We don't talk about Maria anymore, not out of bitterness, but because the story has already told itself. It no longer needs words. The silence between us is peaceful, like the space between waves after a long storm. In the evenings, when the lavender sways under the fading light, I sit on the porch with my tea and think about everything that's passed: the lies, the noise, the humiliation, and the truth that followed. It all feels distant now, like thunder that has already rolled beyond the hills. What remains is calm, not triumph, not vengeance, just calm. People often mistake revenge for justice. They think it must roar, must make the ground shake. But true justice doesn't shout. It simply arrives, patient, precise, inevitable. So if you are an older woman listening this, holding your silence because the world taught you to endure, don't. Speak. Share your story. Not to strike back, but to stand tall. Because dignity, once reclaimed, is louder than any scandal. And peace, true peace, begins the moment you choose yourself over fear. Justice isn't always loud or violent. Sometimes it's quiet, like truth finally stepping into the light.